And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. This is the Steelers OTA edition here, Shayne. And we
Yeah.
can't learn a lot from OTAs, but we do have some notes that we want to get to here and some interesting tidbits. First, let's talk about some of the things that were happening over this past week since our last show. Let's start with Ben Roethlisberger's comments to Kenny Pickett. So Ben has Pickett on his football and podcast. He has him over in his basement, chatting football, all kinds of stuff. And then he says something to Pickett that kind of caught people off guard a little bit. I almost too candid. I mean, I kind of respect Ben for being able to openly share his thoughts, and I think that Pickett was okay with it. But Ben basically said that he didn't believe in Pickett at first, and he didn't want to root for him. And it wasn't until later on that he's like, all right, I think this guy can be a franchise quarterback. And I'm wearing your jersey. We're rocking with you, and I'm in your corner now. And so, but it didn't start off that way, and we kind of got that impression a little bit early on. The two didn't have much of a relationship. It sounded like last year when Pickett first started. So, how do you feel about the remarks that Ben made to Pickett? It's not like he's saying anything behind his back, but some people were already slamming Ben for the comments that he made, saying like, "This is unnecessary. Keep that stuff to yourself." What is your opinion on that?
So speaking of candid comments, we'll have another one later on that we'll talk about with a current player. But I do appreciate the honesty aspect, and I think what people have to understand is when you compete at the level that Ben competed at for his entire career, there's a mindset involved with that a lot of us don't really truly appreciate or understand because we just haven't been there. It's very hard to get in that position and to have
Yeah.
that mindset. And I think, and he touched on it, like he felt like he had something left after his last season. And when you have that feeling as a player that was at the stature that he was at, especially in Pittsburgh, but really in the NFL in
Mm-hmm.
general, it's really hard to let that go. It's really hard to look at someone else doing the job that you did for so long and that you thought you could still do. But I think clearly he realized that, that's not the right attitude to have. I can be, helpful to this guy. I can root for him. I can be a part of things moving forward, or I cannot be. And I think he chose the right thing by trying to get behind the guy that did ultimately replace him. I mean, that's what did happen ultimately. So I do respect it. I will say the
Mm-hmm.
entire episode, because I did watch it, it was a little bit awkward for a lot of it. Like I will say, like it kind of felt like
Yeah.
not that he was taking like shots at him, but like he was trying to kind of little brother him a lot of the time. Which I mean, he's an older guy. It's what he does. Like
Mm-hmm.
it is what it is. But Kenny handled it well, and I think again that just kind of shows who he is as a guy. So like he didn't let it bother him. I don't think it did bother him at all to hear that, and he
Mm-hmm.
understands as well as he does the competitive nature there. So
Yeah, and a little banter back and forth between the two of them as
yeah,
well. Or Pickett takes a jab back,
yeah,
saying, "Well, I
yeah,
was 6 years old when you started."
yeah,
So,
right, yeah. So
yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it. I it might not have been the ideal situation to do that, and it's not
no,
completely necessary to share everything that's on your mind. But I'm glad that the air is at least kind of cleared at this
yeah,
point, and we can kind of move past it, and we can say, all right, these two maybe can have a relationship where Ben can
yeah,
text Pickett after the game, and this can progress forward. You'd like to see always like that smooth transition of passing the torch
yes,
from
yes,
one quarterback to hopefully the next franchise quarterback, and you don't always get with that with teams, and it makes sense because Ben was there so long. He didn't feel like he felt like he had more left to give, and the
right,
Steelers had already given him enough. They in fact, I mean, it could have been even a year over what some of
yeah,
them in the facility
realistically,
wanted, and so they were ready to move on. But yeah, just some interesting comments there. But let's talk about Marcus Golden for a minute here, Shayne, because this is a player the Steelers just recently had in for a visit yesterday. The Steelers need help on the edge. Now, their starters are fine. You got TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. That's really good. Outside of that, concerningly poor. Like you had
yeah,
Malik Reed there last year, who both you and I weren't a big fan of. He didn't offer a lot in that regard. You brought in Nick Herbig, but this is a lot to ask of a rookie. As much as I liked Herbig and I hope that he can make that transition and stay on the edge, that's a huge ask for him to say, let's have you as the edge three, where you're going to rotate in on the left side, on the right side, spell Watt and Highsmith of snaps, and we're going to entrust you in a big role. I think they need that veteran in there. Marcus Golden is a guy that they've been looking at. Are you a fan of this signing? I know he's an older guy at this point. What are your thoughts on him?
So I will touch on the fact, and you brought up Herbig here. I think as much as I am confident watching him that he can be an edge in the NFL, not requiring him to be the third one in year one would be
Yes,
ideal, right? It just
I
is
think that's
because
the key.
yeah, you don't want him to have to be. I think he could end up filling that role reliably, but if you don't need him to, then that's even better, right? That's the idea behind
Mhm.
this. And I think, Golden's a guy who's been very productive at different times in his career. He's got 3 different 10-sack seasons, a lot of
Yep.
seasons without that sack production mixed in, but I think he's always been a guy who's affected the quarterback pretty well from his spot. He has experience playing as a rush linebacker, played a lot of 3-4 systems with the Cardinals and the Giants, so that's a good scheme fit there. I do think he'd be a better bet as a third edge right now than anybody else on the roster because he does have the veteran presence there. He has been productive as recently as 2021. He had 11 sacks for the Cardinals, and last year the Cardinals were terrible. And you could argue that's part of why he didn't have much sack production. But either way, I think he's at least a quality player still, and would be an upgrade over what we've had at the third edge for really since Melvin Ingram was cast off. So.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair assessment. And I liked Ingram a lot more at that stage of his career when the Steelers had him on the roster than I do at Golden at this stage. My
Yes, yeah,
concern here, Shayne, is we're talking about a 32-year-old pass rusher who is 2 seasons ago. I think he had a really solid season.
yeah, 11
This
sacks,
past
yeah,
year, yeah, in this past year in 2022, that sack production went down to
yes,
2.5 sacks,
yeah,
despite being a full-time starter who
hmm
played 781 snaps and 540 plus pass rushing snaps. The production wasn't there at all. Grade wise, didn't grade out particularly well. And he's a guy that didn't have size or athletic traits on his side to begin with. And so you wonder what you're going to get at this guy going into age 32 season. Is he going to be something similar to Malik Reed? Because in terms of physique and how they win, these guys are kind of similar. And remember, Malik Reed, he had some production with Denver before he came to Pittsburgh, but it just did not work out at all when you're just asking him to just tee off on the quarterback. And so I think that Golden is obviously better than what Malik Reed is, even in his old age. It's just, can the Steelers do better for that, even as the backup guy, the rotational guy that comes in? Because we have to look at it in terms of TJ Watt has not been able to stay healthy for
yeah.
2 years. In 2021, he had hip, knee, and groin recurring injury issues. And then last year, the pec tear, the knee scope. So you're hoping for maybe a little bit more than that, but in terms of scheme fits, I think that he would fit right in. It's the type of player that the Steelers look for at the very least. It's just it does blow my mind at times, Shayne, because for the Steelers, as much as they rely on Watt, they don't have a good insurance policy for him. They never really had. And I think that's something that they need to improve. If I have one beef with the front office this year, and there are very, very few, it's invest more into the depth of your edge, because these good teams out there, the Cowboys, the Eagles, these teams are deploying at least 2 full rotations of
Yeah.
talented players because they know how important it is to get pressure on the quarterback and that injuries occur there. So I want Steelers to do something perhaps a little bit more than that. I can live with Marcus Golden being there as the edge 3, making Herbig that 4th guy that can play special teams. I think that's at least a baseline. It gives you a little bit of confidence if Highsmith or Watt were to go down for any amount of time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Kevin Dotson's comments here, Shayne. So Steelers kicked off their OTAs just yesterday. Dotson had some interesting remarks when asked about Isaac Seumalo and where his position is right now. And he essentially conceded and said, yeah, I'm the backup now. He's like, when you go ahead, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he's like, when you go and you pay a guy this much money, he's like, now basically saying, I've got kicked off the starting lineup. So what do you make of his comments there? And I mean, it's not what the coaches probably want you for PR reasons to come out and say, but what do you make of that?
I think the interesting thing about this is so how I choose to look at it is, on one end, it's kind of refreshing to hear a player just be honest, because he would never have said
Yeah.
that unless it was what he actually thinks, right? Like, this is not
Oh yeah.
something a player would say unless he's just laying it out there. But at the other aspect of this is probably part of the reason why he's going to end up getting replaced, is that mentality of saying, okay, they paid
Mhm.
this guy, so he's starting. While it's logical and it makes sense from a fan perspective, you as a player should never take that approach. Like, that's not something you should care about, is how much someone else is getting paid. If he knows that his job is
Yeah.
lost because of that, it was lost before then. Like, it wouldn't have mattered if they
Mhm.
paid Ciamillo, $4 million for a year to come in. If he felt like if that's what the situation is, then he was going to lose his job anyway, probably. And it sucks because this is a guy that I really thought had potential to become a really good offensive lineman for us. And he's shown flashes, but he hasn't put it all together
Yeah.
really at all. Especially as a run blocker, weirdly enough, for as powerful as he is, he's really been better in pass protection in his career. It's just really strange to me to hear a player say this. And I think,
Mhm.
unfortunately, it is an indictment on him. And I think that ultimately, when he is a backup this year, or maybe not even on the team, depending on what we do with him,
Yeah.
this is probably part of the reason why.
Yeah, this guy's been in the doghouse before, I think,
Yeah.
Shane, and there was never like a real like defined report on what
Right.
happened, but
Like,
the
why
Steelers
or
were
exactly.
they were
Yeah.
visibly frustrated with him at
Yeah.
times. You can see that, and that's why they buried him last year and said, "You're fighting for your job. We're not giving it to you," even though there was no viable options
Yeah.
there. And Kendrick
Kendrick
Green
Green
was
was not going to beat
horrendous.
him out, but
It
yeah.
couldn't hold up on one-on-ones or during the preseason or anything else, and they made that competition at left guard go down to the wire, even though we knew that Dotson was the better player and that he
Yeah.
was the guy that was going to win out. The Steelers wouldn't admit that. And it makes me wonder, they've butted heads a little bit in the past, and it's just not something that you say out loud. And
No.
I mean,
Shouldn't.
again, going back to the Ben comments, he's retired at this point.
Yeah, he
He
can
can
say
say
what
what
he
he
wants. It
wants to
doesn't matter.
say. He's not in there in the
Yeah.
facility. Dotson's on this team right now, and he's potentially fighting to make a roster spot. The Steelers signed 2 guards in free agency. Ciamolo was one of them, and Nate Herbig was the other. And so he's competing to be that primary backup guard. And when you go and make a remark like this, boy, that kind of just pushes you down a little bit, I think, in the eyes of the coaches, if you're willing to come out and say these type of things. Now, he's not wrong, I don't believe,
No,
Shane, in
it's
terms
that
of,
he's right. That's
because
the sad part.
yeah,
Is he's
yeah,
right, but it's
when the
just you can't
Steelers
say it. Yeah.
exactly, when the Steelers spend that much on a guard, we know that Ciamolo's starting. There's no contest there. But to come and voice that and to voice your frustration like that, you want to be able to hear these guys when they're asked about this give the right response. And it seems like Dotson rarely does. And I think that that's what gets him in the doghouse with the coaching staff. So I'm interested to see how that shakes up, because even the way that it looked prior to these comments and what's happening right now, it looked like he was going to be the 4th guard
Yeah.
if Herbig panned out, because again, the Steelers spent a little bit of money on Herbig in free agency, and he's been a quality player for Philly and last year in the Jets. And so Dotson's spot is not guaranteed. And he's one player that I've said kind of all along, Shane, I would not be surprised if the Steelers maybe look to ship him for a future pick swap or a late round pick or something.
Conditional. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy that's just not really fit in as well as we had hoped. All right, let's talk about the NFL's new fair catch rule, Shane. This is bizarre. I don't know about this. For those who are just catching up, this just came out. Was it yesterday or
I believe
Monday?
it was yesterday. They actually announced it. Yeah.
Okay, the rule came out yesterday, fair catch rule, and that is going to allow any player on any free kicks, on any kickoff, you can fair catch the ball anywhere inside the 25, and it'll come back out at the 25. So I'm like, Shane, what are we doing here? I mean, you can fair catch the ball at the 5-yard line, and the offense will start their possession at the 25. So before, you couldn't fair catch, obviously, unless you were in the end zone, and it incentivized kickers to try to kind of get some air under that ball, try to get it up right around the 1 or 2, so that teams are forced to return it, and then you can play good special teams and trying to have a good track to flip the field. You can't do that anymore, because now it's like, all right, if there's any question, just wave your hand, go for the fair catch. And so how do you feel this is going to affect the game?
So my whole thing with kickoffs for a while, and I understand the NFL is trying to limit how many of these we have, actual kickoff plays where something actually happens after the kick, right? And it's player safety, which I'm always going to be for, because as much as people complain about it, I'd rather watch the players play and not see them, turn into shells of themselves 20 years after they play. I'm just not into that idea. But at some point, they're going to have to make a decision. Are you going to modify kickoffs and other special teams plays to better give players a chance to still play and make plays on that side of the ball, but not have as much injury risk? Or are you going to get rid of it? Because at this point, if you're not going to allow them to do this, what they've just outlawed basically, then we shouldn't be doing kickoffs. Start the ball at the 25.
Yeah.
Just like let's just stop doing this, because this isn't there. You're not going to have any football on those moments anymore. Like, it just isn't going to happen very often. And the few times you do, it's just because the returner thinks they see a lane And even then they might not, and then it just ends up being a negative play, and then that kick returner gets, chewed out by the special teams coordinator. So
Yeah.
it just is becoming a situation where you either have to modify, like whether it's something like some of the other leagues are doing, where, I really like the idea of having it be a line of scrimmage situation closer to where the ball is going to be kicked. So that way they're not getting all that build up speed and running into each other at high speed. It's more like a normal play. Something like that, whatever it ends up being, if you want to keep that in the game, and I do like special teams, I don't want to see that part of the game go away. It has to be modified instead of them just taking things away from it every week.
Yeah.
Like it just can't keep happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously they admitted this is for player safety. This is on a 1-year trial.
It
So I'm
is,
interested to see how it goes. And they might say like, this is garbage. Let's scrap this and go back. And you do feel for those players who make the bottom of the roster guys who are trying to carve out and show what they can do. Those guys will never see the field if you get rid of a lot of these type of plays or never have any meaningful impact because there's just going to be a fair catch every time.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing I will say, Shayne, is this probably actually does benefit the Steelers. They haven't had good return men hardly ever. And so they're not one of those teams that's going to carve you up typically on special teams and return ability. So it probably does favor them. I'm just not a big fan of the rule in general. Just if this is really what you want to do and you're that concerned about player safety, every team start at the 20 or 25 yard line,
whatever,
and just go from there and say, let's try it. And we're just going to remove it all together. So I'm interested to see how it works. Not a big fan of the rule. I don't think a lot of people are. I bet you if we're to take a poll right now, there's probably a lot that are kind of opposed to it because it takes that element out of football. But again, it's for player safety. We'll see how this turns out. All right. If you guys are here with us live, please drop any questions you might have in the chat for us. We would love to get you to your questions today. Let's talk about the biggest notes from Steelers OTAs so far. We're only 2 days in, and I'm just catching up on day 2's notes because obviously that practice was going on today before the show. So what we know about from yesterday, Shayne, some pretty interesting things here. We're going to touch on each of them a little bit and share our thoughts. Let's kick things right off here. With Alex Highsmith was there and present to open OTAs yesterday, the first wave of OTAs that runs from yesterday until tomorrow. Highsmith was there, and there were a lot of questions as to whether or not he would be, because obviously Alex Highsmith is entering a contract year. We're going to talk a lot in specifics about his contract and make some of our contract predictions here later on in the show. But Highsmith is entering a contract year, and so you wonder about this. I don't think anybody would blame him if he decided not to show up. You are a 3rd round pick who has grossly outplayed your contract so far. And yet he's coming to work. He has the Cam Hayward mentality. Like, I'm going to be there. I'm going to work. I'm going to show them why I deserve this contract at the expense of potentially risking like a non-contact injury or something that way.
Yeah, and I think a part of this, like I always say, like I'm always for players using whatever leverage they have to get the deal that they want, right? And that's why, like when TJ kind of sat out for a while before he got his big deal, when other players do that, I'm never going to sit there and say, oh, I can't believe they're doing that. But I think that this does signal that one of two things: either Highsmith just doesn't really feel that way, think about it that way, he wants to be there, get better, which is a great mentality to have in general. But I also understand when they don't, or as we'll get talking about later, there is talks happening that he's happy with where they're at, right? Where the Steelers and him are talking about it. They're going in the right direction, and he doesn't feel the need to try to force anything or hold any leverage, because he just might like where the direction is going, or he just might really want to be here, which is great if that's the case. So that's kind of my take on it. I hope that is what's happening, but just always nice to have as many people at OTAs as you can. So.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a little bit too, but I kind of get the feeling that that's where they're at as well, Shayne, because of a couple of reasons. First of all, Khan in some of his first order of duty wasted no time in getting Minka's deal done. Like he wanted that thing done out of the way. Didn't want to run into the TJ Watt situation. And so I think that it's very possible, and the rumors suggest right now that the two sides are in negotiation with each other. They could be close on language right now, and Highsmith's like, all right, this thing's gonna get done soon. I'm just gonna show up. Or he just has that mentality from being that former 0-star recruit, walk-on player who's like, I'm just gonna show up and I'm gonna work hard every day, and that's how I'm gonna prove myself. So either way, he's there, he's working. And again, biggest thing we hope for all of us during OTAs, everybody needs to stay healthy. We don't want to see anybody go down with a non-contact injury or something.
Yeah.
Exactly. Calvin Austin going through drills. This is a player that many were asking about. And we actually had, I think it was a question either on last week's show or the week before,
about how he's doing,
how's the
where he's
progress
at.
on
Yeah.
Calvin Austin? Well, it looks like now we know he's out there. He's not restricted. This is a guy who underwent surgery, landed on IR, missed his entire rookie season, which is never a good sign for a rookie fourth round pick who you want to see out there and performing and getting kind of his first reps during that rookie season. Now he's kind of a year behind the learning curve, missed all of training camp in preseason last year. So now he's kind of playing catch up here, but it's good to see him out there running drills. He looks quick. I'm excited for a guy that has that top end speed on their offense.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to see, like, in preseason and training camp practices, like, what does he do? Like, what things are they asking him to do? Because, it's weird with him, because going back to his tape whenever he was in Memphis, he excelled on the outside multiple times. Like, he was able to
Yeah.
just, beat press coverage because he's just too quick, do all that stuff. Like, I could see him kind of having a multiple role on this offense. A lot of gadget stuff, probably just because why not with a guy with his skill set? He can play in the slot. I think that's ultimately on offense his best spot when he's just playing true receiver. But I mean, if you get a good matchup and on a corner, maybe a guy who isn't very good at press or isn't going to come up and man up with him, like if you put him on the side, he can threaten deep. Like, this is a guy that can do a lot of things that a lot of guys his size usually can't do. So I'm just really looking forward to hopefully seeing a full offseason for him, see what he looks like, see what they ask him to do in training camp and then in preseason as well.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a guy that who was uber productive at
Yes,
Memphis, and he
very
had a
much so.
terrific game against Sauce Gardner, who
He did,
might be
yeah.
the best cornerback in the NFL already.
Yeah,
I don't
depending on
know, he's up there. He was fantastic as a rookie,
Yeah.
and so he showed at least in college he could play on the outside. Now again, you are talking about a 5'7" and 7/8 receiver. That is tiny. I think he's going to be pigeonholed to the slot
a
in
lot
the
of the
NFL.
time, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see where his alignments come. I have a feeling, Shayne, what's going to happen is the Steelers are going to have certain 11 personnel packages, some for Allen Robinson, some for Calvin Austin, depending on their skill sets in their route combinations. Very interested to see how he falls in line there, though. And my hope, Shayne, is that he's just too dynamic and explosive of a
To keep
player
off
from
the field,
the slot that you don't keep him off the field. If Robinson is just a reserve player for you, I'm perfectly fine with that, with the guaranteed money and all, because it means that Calvin Austin turned out.
Yeah.
So very interested to see his progress. At least we know that he's out there and he's healthy right now. Next up on the list here, Shayne, from my notes, is Dan Moore Jr. was starting over Broderick Jones. Now don't flip out here. This is very, very routine from the Steelers. They are a team that is very much about seniority, and they'll say, Moore, you were our starter last year. You are a starter until proven otherwise. And it didn't matter if they traded up in the first round to get Broderick Jones. That job is going to be his soon enough. It probably from the start of the season, if I had to make my prediction, but they don't do the business backwards where they're going to say, I'm going to let the young guy come in from day one. You still have to prove yourself. You have to show that you're working on your mechanics and that you're ready to go in that position. Now, at the same time, Shayne, I think this is kind of going to give Dan Moore a boost too and say, like, if every rep that I have, knowing that I got Broderick on my heels, I'm going to play like it's my last. And so I'm interested to see if he would take another step up in year 3. This is a guy who was a pretty toolsy guy coming out. I mean, testing wise, Tess is a really good athlete, has the body type for the position. I'm going to be so interested to see what's going to come next for the Steelers. We know the job's going to be Broderick's eventually. Are they going to give him a shot to compete at right tackle? Is he only going to take the left tackle reps? I would have to imagine at some point they're going to flip, and Dan Moore is going to take tackles at left and right tackle, at the very least to be the swing tackle, if not to maybe compete with Chooks. So how do you see that playing out here?
Yeah, so again, just to reiterate, like any fans who are concerned about that, they shouldn't be. This is not what the Steelers do. They do not just plug rookies in right away unless they're just clearly better than everyone they have, right? Where there's really no question about it. So for this, obviously, I think at worst, we're going to see more play and be the true starter up through most of training camp, and then Jones eventually might get slotted in if he just beats him out. But again, they're going to make him earn that job. Like, Jones is going to have to come in and prove that right now specifically he is a better player than Moore Jr. And I think he will ultimately. Like you said, I think all talent wins out ultimately, and the draft position wins out. But Moore did mention that he has been repping right tackle on his own accord for a reason. I think that is because he knows Jones is coming eventually. It's now, how do I stay or give myself a chance to continue to start by maybe being able to compete with a core four, what maybe even if it's not this year, next year, or whenever it may be. So he's taking the right approach, and I really like to see that because this is a guy that knows, I was a 4th-round pick. I've played better than expected technically, but I'm also, getting replaced for a reason probably here soon. I got to take every advantage I can get. So repping at right tackle on his own accord, doing those things, he's doing everything right, and I think that will ultimately help him stick around a lot longer than he would have ultimately.
Yeah, and you're still talking about like a 24-year-old tackle here who
Yes, he has
can still
potential to
have
get better. He can,
and he could have a great career ahead of him. Remember, even if he's just a swing tackle, like Chris Hubbard broke the bank for the Browns when he left the Steelers.
You can
So
get paid
you
good if
can
you're just
still,
okay.
yes, swing tackles get paid
Yeah.
well, and so he's got these final 2 years of his rookie deal still to prove himself, and he's going to be ready. Even if that comes as a swing tackle, Shayne, he's going to be ready for the opportunity if Broderick or a core four were to go down. He needs to be able to step in and say and basically. I'm drawing a loss, and I'm trying to say he needs to audition essentially for other teams because he's going to be a guy that could potentially make a big contract, kind of like what a core four second contract was, where he was a fringe starting player and yet he still got paid. And so good tackles get paid. He certainly has the traits, and I don't think he's reached his peak yet. Just going into year 3,
he has
more
room.
still.
Yeah, he has room to grow, and I think ultimately there's a chance that at some point this year, if core four doesn't play or going into training camp next year, he might have a shot at playing right tackle for us as a starter, and you could see Jones and him as a really young, hopefully very good tackle duo. So you never know. He's definitely taking the right approach though.
And that's certainly possible as well, Shayne, because the Steelers could get out of a core four's contract next year, save money, and then you can say, all right, Dan Moore, you're our right tackle now. So they could go that route as well if they like the progress that he's made there, and if they think that competition is close enough. So that's an interesting thought as well. Staying with the offensive line here, Kendrick Green was running as the backup center in the first day of OTAs. Now, if you recall, Green was a center as a rookie. He played guard in college, but he made that transition to center, and now he made the transition to center, played guard in his second season when she looked terrible last year. I was on hand for several days down at training camp, and he just did not hold up well there. He had a horrible preseason. Now it looks like the Steelers are open to the idea of moving him back to center, at least during OTAs. And it makes sense because of how deep their guards are right now. You've got Isaac Seumalo, James Daniels, Kevin Dotson, Nate Herbig. And so obviously as a guard, Kendrick Green is going to be buried there, and a guy that doesn't even project to make the roster. As a center, you now have a chance. J.C. Hassenauer signed with the Giants during free agency. There's no real competition right now behind Mason Cole. And so it looks like the Steelers might give Green a chance to kind of revert back to that position he played as a rookie and say, show us what more you can do. It needs to be better, but show us what more you can do to stick around at this position.
Yeah, I think that this is the only chance he has, right? Is in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree.
Is at center. I think even though he wasn't good as a rookie, he was still better than he was as a guard, right? And just looking at it. So clearly this is his best chance to make the roster or just really stay around the NFL in general, is to play center and show you can do it at least a backup level. And really outside, like you said, Mason Cole is the only true like center on the roster. Daniels has played center and obviously he could be. And I think right now, if Mason Cole were to go down, it would definitely be Daniels moving into center probably and letting one of the backup guards come in for Daniels' spot. But having a true backup at center that doesn't have to move out of his position is still great to have. So I think if Green can show that he's at least capable of holding up at center, and if he can beat out Spencer Anderson that they drafted, who I think is the only guy who really could compete at a backup center right now on the roster, truly, then yeah, he has a shot. But again, we've seen enough of him at this point where I'm not going to bank on it happening. But I'm glad they're at least moving him to a position where he has a fighting chance to stick around.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to your former draft status is oftentimes tied to your opportunity. And so being that third round pick, I think that he might stand a little better chance even after being buried. And he didn't even see action last year at all. Like he was just completely didn't even see the field. So he's hoping to kind of reclaim some of that status maybe again and say, yeah, I can. The competition is very thin behind Mason Cole right now. And so it's possible that if this were the choice, that he can make the roster. If he stayed at guard, no chance at all, because you're talking about keeping a fifth guard around. I mean, that's not going to happen.
No,
so
you don't do that,
unless for some reason they cut Dotson for personality reasons or whatever.
Whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the only way. But as an actual player, he's not going to make the team as a guard. And so interested to see what happens there at the very least. But this is something I've been banging the table for. And I know that a lot of people in Steelers media, fans, they felt the opposite way. They're like, oh, this guy's a natural guard. You need to move him back to guard. That's where he played in college. I'm like, he's not going to work there. I mean, you can see he already struggled to anchor and with power at center. You're only going to get more one-on-one matchups as a guard, and his percentiles go down to almost nothing when you put him there. 6'1" and 7'8",
yeah,
77-inch wingspan, and so this guy is tiny as a guard. He has to be. He's a center-only guy, and I kind of figure that when they drafted him based on his size, he needs to make it work there as a reserve center, or he's not going to work for anybody on any team. So
yeah,
that's basically where we are with Green at this point, entering year 3. Darnell Washington. This is probably the guy that's drawing the most buzz on Twitter right now, just with video clips and stuff. And again, there's nobody covering him. This is OTAs. These guys were in shorts. So I'm not going to go crazy here, but the guy definitely does look the part. I mean, this is a big tight end. I've seen some shots of him next to Broderick Jones already. These two pairing with each other. I'm like, this guy is like comparably large to Broderick, the left tackle. And so people are definitely getting excited for what he might offer in his rookie year.
Yeah, the thing with Darnell Washington is, like, regardless, like, if you didn't know how good he was or wasn't, you just look at him and you're like, that guy looks like a freak compared to everybody else. Like, even on a field full of NFL players, he just looks different than everybody else. And obviously that means very little ultimately at the end of the day if you're just going off of that. But combined with what we know he can do as a blocker, and again, the receiving skills need refined, and I think that he's never going to be that true route runner type, but he looks good enough out there. Like, I really think he looks good out there moving around, moving fluidly. And if he can, again, this year, all I'm expecting from him is to do what he already knows he can do well, and what we already know he can do well, and just come in and be a bulldozer in the run game when we need you to. Again, even a little bit of pass protection probably on certain plays. We'd love to see that. Maybe put him next to Jones again, help him out. But again, he looks the part for sure. Like you said, that's probably the best thing you can say for sure about it. And I'm just curious to see kind of how they're going to use him in year 1, how much run he actually gets.
Yeah. I don't think there's any question, Shayne, that he's going to be used primarily as a blocker. I think we all know that, at least from the gate. Watching him run routes, like, here's the only issue that I have is, like, you watch Pat Freiermuth, that guy is smooth.
It's different.
And then you watch back and it really, really is. And so, and then you watch Washington run, you can definitely see a little bit more of the hip tightness. And route running can be improved. It's just your hip fluidity and your agility and that kind of stuff. That kind of is what it is, I think. Now, he tested phenomenally, obviously, but I don't think like he moves laterally as well as the testing numbers would indicate.
No, generally not.
Insane shuttle time. Like you don't see that on field. Like, he's not Odell Beckham as a mover on the football field. So it's worth noting. But again, this guy isn't going to win with his quick twitch anyway. He's going to box people out. He's going to win down the seam. He's going to win in traffic. And so still excited for what he offers there, even if he never becomes a great route runner. But definitely people are riding that hype train pretty hard already with him. And he's a fun guy to watch. And so we'll keep tabs on him as we go. And it doesn't look like the knee swelling is bothering him at all. He's out there. No reports of anything so far as in terms of how that goes. And maybe all of the injury concerns were more about longevity rather than
current issues.
The current issues. And this was a guy that, again, he played in all 15 games for Georgia last year. So that really wasn't the issue. He was flagged for his knees. And so we'll see how those hold up and might not give him any problem at all. We'll find out. Shayne, if there's something that you want to watch for today, tomorrow, so we rehash today's practice, look at tomorrow, and then these next 2 sessions. And so again, if you remember how OTAs works, there's going to be a little bit of a break. The Steelers will pick it up again. There'll be a little break. Steelers will pick it up again, and that'll be it for OTAs. And so we don't learn a whole lot. But over these next several sessions the Steelers are going to have, what are you looking for and what type of things do you want to see?
I do want to see how they use the offensive line, how they move those guys around and where they play.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think ultimately, even though we kind of know at this point who is probably going to end up starting ultimately, I want to see, like, does Green continue to only rep at center? And that shows, okay, he is vying for just that spot. Does Dotson get much run if this is how he feels about the situation? Are we going to start to see him get phased out? Or, maybe he's going to get moved around to the other guard spot as a back, like whatever it may be. And like, how many reps does Jones get versus more like how is that? Do they give any Jones any like first team reps, if you want to call it that, in OTAs? Like just how
Mhm.
that kind of shakes out, because there's so many quality players now on that line, honestly, that I'm excited about it, but also it does make you question, like, okay, who's going to actually be the backup here? Who's going to do what? Where are they going to play? And once that all sorts
Yeah.
out, I think we're going to have a great chance of having a really good offensive line again this year. So
Yeah, I think that's the case as well, Shane. I think one of the biggest things that we look for in OTAs every year is the pecking order at
yes,
position. Like,
literally,
where
yeah,
do these
exactly.
guys, how do they run through drills? Because it does matter a little bit in terms of how the Steelers are currently viewing them.
Yeah,
Start
like
with
where
the
people are
starter,
at.
then the
Yeah.
backup, then so on and so forth. One of those in particular, I'm interested to see the cornerback position. I haven't
Yes.
really come across the cornerback videos right now, but I'm going
Me
to dig
either.
into that a little bit and see if I can figure something out there. But I'm interested to see, because they had a lot of shakeup at the cornerback position
They
this
did
year.
a
Obviously,
ton.
I would assume that Peterson's going to be the first in line, even though he's fresh on the team. He's that guy. I mean, he's
He's the
that
veteran
future Hall of
presence. Yeah.
Fame level player that the Steelers have, even just on this at this stage in his career. And then after him, it's like Levi Wallace, Joey Porter, Corey Trice. Where do these guys slot in? How do the Steelers view him at the moment? And how are they going to view him? Is it going to change at all by the end of OTAs? Are we going to have to wait until the middle of training camp before we see a change in the pecking order? Just very interested in how the whole cornerback situation in general is going to play out, because, again, I think that they're a team of, you got a pair of guys, young guys with upside and in terrific size and length in Porter and Trice. Where do they slot by the end of preseason and training camp, I think is going to be what's most interesting when it comes to the cornerback battle there. And at the same time, Shane, wide receiver. I mean, this is suddenly a very deep group of wide receivers. You get Calvin Austin back from IR on Anthony Miller. You brought in Hakeem Butler. You signed him to a contract through the summer at least. And so how are these guys going to shake up? What order are they going to go in? And then, I mean, we can only know so much at OTAs, but once we get into the preseason training camp, to see how these guys fall in line in terms of starters, backups, third string. I mean, there's a lot of guys there. I'm interested to see what kind of role they play. But for now, kind of just judging the pecking orders. If you get a chance to go on Twitter and watch any of their videos, just take notes of who is first in line, second in line, third in line, because that kind of gives you just a general sense of how the Steelers coaching staff are viewing these players at certain positions at this point in time. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And again, if you are joining us live, please drop your questions for us. We would love to be able to get to those. And as you are doing that, Shane and I are going to talk about Alex Highsmith and his contract extension looming. It hasn't happened yet. Could happen soon. And like we said, Shane, anywhere, I think these last 2 years have kind of given us a sample of what to look for. Minka's happened very early on, has happened over a month ahead of training camp. And Watts didn't happen until like the season was about to kick off, and Watt marches into the facility like, I'm signing this thing. Right. I'm not waiting any longer. His agent wanted him to hold out that whole summer to avoid injury, and I get it. He was coming off MVP season. So Highsmith here. Now we got a guy that it looks a little bit different. It's not going to be as easy in some ways to iron out the details, because you have to decide where this guy falls in line compared to other contracts in the NFL. For Watt and Minka, I think it was relatively easy, Shane. It's like Watt was the best at his position at the time, the most productive. He's going to get paid the most. Minka was the most productive at his position with the accolades. He's going to get paid the most in terms of what safeties do. And since then, he's been leapfrogged, and that'll happen as contract values go up and the salary cap raises every year. But Highsmith's a little bit trickier, because it's like, all right, do you judge this guy solely off of production? And if so, that's going to be a very pricey contract, and that's what his agent's going to argue. Where do you think this contract number is going to come in, Shane? What's that going to look like? I can tell you right now, the figure that Spot Rack has right now is an average annual earnings of $13.9 million per season. They don't show the guaranteed money there, which again is going to be really important. But they compare him to players like Matt Judon, Josh Sweat. So do you think 13.9, do you think that would get it done, Shane, or is it going to have to be more than that, north of that for the Steelers?
So it's tough. And I always say, and you kind of touched on it, the easiest deals to do for both a player and a team are the top of the market deals and the bottom of the market deals, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're a player that doesn't have a good standing in the NFL and you're just trying to make sure you stay in, or you're trying to establish yourself, a below market or low market deal
Mhm.
is pretty easy to come to. It's usually a 1 year prove it deal type thing. If you're top of market, you look at what the top of the market is, or I want more than that. It's pretty much that simple, right? A
Yeah.
lot of the time, at least in terms of what to expect from it, right? But these mid market, like these tier two deals of pass rushers, especially that aren't number ones on their own team, but maybe someone else could view them as number one if they were to go to free agency. It gets really dicey because you look at Highsmith's production, like you said, and he produced like a lot of the top edge rushers in the NFL last year. He did from a just purely production
Mhm.
standpoint, but his on-field play and his style and what he does and what his skills are, I think I view him as firmly like a very, very good number two pass rusher. He would not be a
For
guy that I
sure.
would, pay as my number one, like true captain of my defense type of player. And that's no slight to him. That's really
Mhm.
good to be like a top of the tier two type of
Oh,
edge
yeah.
rusher for a third round pick, right? So for me, my guess is because the Steelers definitely, I know they want to keep him. They want to keep that duo together. Their edge depth is already, as we know, not very good. So losing him and have
Mhm.
to replace him next year would be not ideal. They could of course play with franchise tagging him, but that figure is gigantic for edge, so that'd be very difficult. I think ultimately it's going to come in around about 15, 16 million a year over probably 4 years is my guess, like a 4 year, $60-ish million contract with I'd guess about 60-ish% of that guaranteed is what my guess right now.
That's probably a pretty good guess, Shayne. And this is what I feel like fans need to understand, that your raw production does not equate to the player that you are. I'm not going to
Yes.
take anything away from Highsmith. I think that
No.
he has done a phenomenal job. And in terms of third round picks go, as good as you can possibly ask
Pretty
for a
much. Yeah.
third round
It's
pick.
hard to get
It's
better.
just
Yeah.
that when you're looking at him and saying, this guy deserves to be paid like a 14 and a half sack, 5 forced fumble player, which is the raw numbers that he produced, there's a lot more that goes into it than that, Shayne. There's
Yeah.
pressure rate and what he was, the lack of what he was able to do when Watt was not on the
Yes.
field.
Yeah.
I mean, most of his production, 80% of his production came when Watt was there in the second half of the season and in week one when Watt was there before he got injured. It does worry me a little bit that he's just always going to be that firm number two guy. And that then the question becomes, how much do you pay this guy who is a little bit reliant on Watt to help him out, to take some pressure off of him on his side so that he can be very productive in that overhang role there. And so what do they do with that? And again, I agree with you. The Steelers are going to get it done. They're not going to want to lose him. It just becomes a question of how much do you pay him? If that figure is accurate, Shayne, 13.9 million, that would make him tied for the 17th highest paid edge defender in the NFL at that figure. I don't think that that's going to be okay with his agent being 17th, be like, look at this. What's with this? I'm coming off of 14 and a half season. My client's coming off of 14 and a half sack season. He needs to be paid as such. And so unfortunately, your pay does often align with the production that you're able to do, regardless of what the film says. If the
Yeah.
film screams that Alex Highsmith is a high end number two edge rusher instead of that pure go-to number one guy just going to dominate you no matter what. A lot of it does come down to production, unfortunately. And so this contract is going to be big. I think it's going to be north of this, Shayne. I think it's going to be maybe closer to the 16 range. And I'll be interested to
Yeah.
see where that comes in. And again, that to me, it's a little bit high, but it kind of goes back to what choice do you really have here? It's like, do
That's
you
the
let him
problem.
walk and
Yeah.
say, I'm content with taking a compensatory third or fourth round pick, depending on, and again, what Steelers do in free agency will cancel out some of that money. So if the Steelers go out and spend big on somebody else in free agency, they might cancel out that third round comp pick that they otherwise would have gotten. And even if you get the third round comp, he's worth a lot more than that. And so it's
Yeah.
like, what choice do you have? You have to pay the guy and you have no depth at the position. He's a young, productive player at a premium position. And so I understand the thought process completely. I think that he does need to be paid because you just really don't have a lot of options here. It's just, I would prefer to get him a little bit cheaper than what the Steelers will probably end up getting him for, if I had to guess right now. And that brings me to my next question here, Shayne, is when do you think something can get done?
Real quick, I just wanted to. There's a chat we have.
Oh yeah, go throw it up.
Okay, when y'all gonna talk about the kicker and punter issue we have with Harvin and Boswell. So Boswell, I will give him a pass for last year. I think that's probably why we're
Yeah.
thinking about. He admittedly, we had made some questionable, I should say, Mike, unfortunately, Tomlin had some questionable decisions when it comes to kicking the football. So I will give Boz a little bit of a pass there, and we know he's been great most of the time. Harvin, there's a reason why Man is in as a competition with him. I think that one of those two will hopefully be a good punter this year. But yeah, if you want to know about kicker and punter stuff, we will talk about that, I'm sure, as we see more stuff. But Boswell, I'm confident will be able to bounce back. Harvin, you just hope something clicks with him. So
yeah, there's no real race there. There's no real competition for Boswell's job, but there is for Harvin's, and you got Braden Mann in there. I think that one truly is a whoever looks best in training camp could win that job outright. But otherwise, yeah, but I would expect a bounce back season. We've seen it in the past. I mean, we've seen Boswell kick like 65% and then come back with just like a phenomenal back-to-back years. And so I'm not too worried. At some point, Shayne, it gets inside kickers' heads, and I don't know what it is, but you can hit that wall where it's like you're just not good anymore. And I hope that doesn't happen anytime soon with Boswell. Some of these kickers last forever. You get like those, those Robbie Golds and those guys that can just kick forever. And other guys like the Mike Vanderjacks and the who was Dallas's kicker they had here a little bit ago? Drawing a blank right now. Dane.
Yeah, I can't think.
These guys that are kicking and converting at like a historic rate, and then all of a sudden they like fall off a cliff and they don't ever get it back. So that happened to Boswell once, and he recovered from it. I would think that he can do it again. And so it is a big year for him, but I do think that that Boswell will bounce back. But the punter competition, that's wide open. Going back to Highsmith here, Shayne, when do you think that the deal can get done like this, knowing that this is a guy that is not right on the top, right on the bottom, and so the contract language is a little bit more difficult. The guaranteed money becomes a little bit more difficult because Steelers don't like to give those guarantees out past year one. Do you think that they would be willing to do something like that with Highsmith? I don't think that they're going to break trend with Highsmith. I mean, they did that for TJ Watt because he was an exceptional player and then the star of their team. But when do you think something is ultimately going to get done?
I do think it's going to be before training camp officially kicks off, if I had to guess. I think as much as it probably wasn't the only reason Khan did this, but I think part of why the Trubisky deal happened and why they extended him out is not just because they view him as a long-term backup and he wants to be there, but because it does free up cap space. It allows them to put some of that money, into Highsmith's deal and move that money around and make it more affordable down the stretch of his deal. So I think it's going to be soon, and I think it's just going to come down to, like you said, the guaranteed money aspect. How much is it going to be? How much are they willing to put in? I think that with Khan, we might start to see with him now in full range of things. I think that he might be more willing with the way the NFL is trending to maybe not like nothing fully guaranteed or anything like that, but maybe the first 2 years of a deal, maybe opposed to just the first, might become a more normal thing for them to do. And I think with Highsmith, if you do that, if you do get guarantees in the first 2 years, those last 3 and 4 years, if you do a 4-year deal, which is what I still expect it to be if they get it done, would become much more manageable if they need to either move on from him or move money around or anything else. And especially with Kenny on his rookie contract, and if they want to maximize that window, having a lot of that money in those first 2 years would allow them to not have to worry as much about the cap.
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible, Shayne. I kind of envision the deal being a little bit shorter, honestly, just because from his agent's perspective, it might be one of those situations where it's like, all right, you're entering age 27 season. Let's get you like a 2-year extension, and then we'll get you one more bite of the apple here, one more big contract. When the cap goes up again, you can make more per season, more guaranteed money. So I kind of think that if I had to guess, maybe split the difference. Maybe it's a 3-year. I was kind of leaning 2 or 3 the whole time. It just seems like teams aren't as willing to give out like the 4 or 5-year contracts anymore. And they, in the past, teams did this all the time. I mean, I remember like Tyron Smith of Dallas, he got a 10-year contract. Like that's kind of unheard of. But the Steelers, I mean, even like you think back to like Polamalu and those type of players, the Steelers would hand out 5- and 6-year deals. It just seems like they're getting more towards, and it might be an agent thing as well, and saying, let's hit the market again. Let's give them a 2 or 3-year contract. I'm okay with the 4-year deal, I think. And obviously, the way that the contracts are always structured is by the end of those contracts, you can get out if you need, and you can save most of that money in the final year or two. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe the Steelers offer bigger signing bonus to try to get some of the actual cap number down for them. And again, just knowing how Khan and Kevin Colbert have done business over the past 2 decades, really, in terms of their contracts go, they're going to want to lower that cap hit immediately and push some of that money back. And so if they need to, they can restructure later on, but they want to give themselves as much flexibility early on. And so that is somewhat how I would project Highsmith's contract to look. If you're just asking me to spitball right here, I would say, Shayne, I would say probably in the 16-ish range, 2 to 3 year deal. And I think that is that's going to be high. I know it's not what I would prefer. I really hope it does come in the 13, 14 range. But I really think that it's probably ultimately going to be that, because again, you're coming off of a really, really productive season. And Highsmith's agent can even use that as leverage, saying, hey, look, TJ Watt was out half the year. Highsmith put up 14.5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles. I mean, if you want to get really in depth, his sack score was the second best in the NFL, had a lot of high quality sacks mixed in there as well, which is important, I think, as well. The one thing that does concern me a little bit, like I alluded to already with Highsmith, is the pressure isn't consistent enough yet. I think he needs to be more consistent play to play and game to game, but the overall production was fantastic. And it's hard to argue against that when you're trying to negotiate with an agent. So I do think it comes north of the 13.9 number. Maybe not quite to 16, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was all the way up there as well. And just looking real quick, Shayne, I do want to throw out some of the players in that range. And I've got it pulled up on Over the Cap right now. Carl Lawson, $15 million a year. Hassan Reddick, 15. What a steal that was.
Yeah.
Trey Hendrickson, 15. Danielle Hunter, 14.5. Chandler Jones is at 17 million, even in his old age.
Regretting that one a little bit, I think.
They sure are. Shaquille Barrett, 17. Harold Landry, 17.5. Cam Jordan, kind of a big base end, but 17.5. And then it jumps up to Von Miller at 20. I mean, he's not going to get that level, obviously, but you look at some of those names there, you can see why his agent can make a case and say, hey, look, this is what these guys are getting. Highsmith outproduced those guys. And so we want that money. And so I think they probably meet somewhere in the middle. Maybe they start lower and they meet somewhere in the middle. The smaller, the better. Obviously, if you're looking at it from the fan side of things, you want to save as much money as possible towards the cap. You obviously want Highsmith, and you feel happy for Highsmith, this guy who was a former walk-on at Charlotte, now making some guru bucks here, and that's going to be awesome for him. But I'm interested to see how this comes in, and it might be sooner rather than later, Shayne. If Omar Khan has his way, and this guy likes to get stuff done, so it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Don't call him the Connors for nothing, right?
That is for sure. I made my projection for the contract. Now let's kind of project his season, if we could, Shayne, in 2023. Obviously, this is speculation. We don't know exactly how it's going to go. Oh, great show. Thanks for that. We really appreciate that. So thanks
absolutely.
For the comment. Let's project his season here for a minute, Shayne. Can he repeat this? I mean, is this production sustainable? What are you going to look for from Highsmith this year? Let's assume that Watt stays relatively healthy, at least closer to like what he did in 2021. Do you think that this is repeatable at all from him? Or do you think it's kind of a fluky thing? Like you'll never hit that total again. Maybe you'll get to 10 sacks. How do you feel? And not just in terms of production, Shayne, but actually just the film and the impact on the game. How do you feel that Highsmith is going to be for the Steelers in 2023?
So I think, like you mentioned, if TJ Watt's mostly healthy this year, I think that you're going to see a very similar season that you saw last year. Because again, a lot of his sacks and his pressures, they were not these fluky like plays that you see guys clean up sacks all the time. Like he won cleanly a lot last year, really did. And I think his skill set, when he gets those one-on-ones, he's very difficult to handle between his spin move, which is just nasty when he pulls it off.
Oh, yeah.
He's got good speed to the edge. His power's gotten better, at least compared to his rookie season. He's gotten added that to his game enough where it's not a liability necessarily at all. He's a guy that when he's the number 2 opposite of a guy like TJ Watt, this is a guy who I think can consistently get into that double-digit sack range. And you hope his pressure numbers come up a little bit. That's really the last step he has to take if he wants to be firmly like one of the better edge 2s in the league consistently. But even if he just gets those quality wins, because you really need that out of the guys that get one-on-ones, if they can win consistently in the situations and clean up or just get to the quarterback quickly, that's huge for just, again, when the defense can play off of their edge duo, right? When TJ is up to par and he's playing well, when Alex is playing well, that defense gets disgusting because it's just so hard to throw on them whenever you're getting pressure because Minka's back there. You have to worry about him. I can't just throw this ball up because Minka's going to go get it. Like, you can't do that as an offense, right? So if that works out, like I said, if TJ is healthy, expect similar numbers. Maybe not the forced fumbles. That can be a little bit fluky, but unless you're like, Charles Tillman or somebody like that. But really, you need to expect similar production if he wants to get paid the way he's going to be paid. So you should expect that from him.
Yeah, and I have no questions about his character, work ethic, anything obviously that way at all. So when this guy gets paid, you're not going to have to worry about him pumping on the brakes there, and he's going to go all out. He's going to try his best for the team. In terms of sack production, no, I don't think it's going to be the same as it was last year, but I think that he could, I think he can be a better player, Shayne, but not be as productive. I think that's very incredibly possible. I mean, you're entering the prime of your career right now. Like, these next 3 years is probably going to be the prime of Highsmith's career. And so I think that he can be a really, really solid player for the Steelers and yet not be as productive as he was last year. Just be more consistent as a pass rusher. And like you said, man, the human cyclone, like that needs to be his nickname. Like, that spin move is nasty. It might be the best in the league at his position, honestly. So
it's just spin move wise, it has to be up there, right? Like,
it's pretty wicked. Like, for him to not like lose any speed off of that and still be able to get those high quality sacks on those, I'm impressed by it. So I would expect to see a lot more of that. I'm excited for him and have the pairing together again, because my goodness, when those guys are together, and we haven't seen it a ton with how banged up Watt has been, they could be a pretty special duo there.
Oh yeah.
We got another comment chiming in, 11 to 13 sacks. Yeah, I can see that. Shayne, before we close off here today, go ahead and just give me, it's so arbitrary, and I really don't care about it that much. We already think that Highsmith is going to have a solid season. Where would you set the over under in terms of his sack total, assuming he plays a 17-game season?
I think setting anybody who isn't the absolute number one guy on a team any higher than 10 is just kind of being unfair. So I'd probably set it at 10, considering he had 14.5 last year. And touching on what you said before, like, production in the NFL matters, but it also matters the context of it, right? Just because he maybe doesn't hit 14.5 sacks next year and doesn't have 5 forced fumbles and all that, doesn't mean that he isn't going to be as good or better as a player next year. Because you have to look at it, maybe TJ gets a ton of sacks again this year because we know he can do that. Maybe, Highsmith just gets a lot of, tackles for loss, makes big plays, but not as many sacks or whatever. Maybe he gets a lot more pressures. They just don't turn into as many sacks. Like, there's a lot of factors that go into that. So if he doesn't repeat his production, it's not a guarantee it's because he didn't get better. It might just be circumstantial. So setting it at 10, though, I think is fair, because, again, when you're playing opposite TJ, you're going to get opportunities one-on-one with how well he can win in those situations, how often he gets those high-quality sacks. I'd be surprised if a 17-game season doesn't result in at least 10.
Yeah, my thought all along, Shayne, was I would set that total at 9.5. So you obviously would take the over, right? You would take the 10 sacks. Yeah. I would set it at 9.5 just because I think that sack production from year to year, it's just not very repeatable.
For most guys, it's not,
It's more sustainable, like pressures from year to year, or even TFLs from year to year. Sack production can kind of be hit or miss. Now, that's still great. Like, if he hits 8 sacks, 9 sacks, 10 sacks, anywhere in that range, that's a really solid season. And like I said, I think that it's very possible that he's a better player on film, even if he takes a sizable step back in sack production. If he's got 8.5 sacks as opposed to the 14.5, but he looks better everywhere else next year, that could still make potentially a bigger impact for the team. Now, again, the forced fumbles, those are all big game-changing plays, and so we want to see those happen still. It's just those are kind of fluky to track year to year, kind of like interceptions are. Like, you can never know how many picks you're going to get in a year. I would probably set it at 9.5, and I would feel like that is probably the mark where I'd have a hard time saying, do I bet over, bet under? Let us know what you guys think in the comments. If you have any questions, please drop them down in the comment section, and Shayne and I will try to get to those after the show. Thank you for joining us today on the Still Curtain Podcast. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube, or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Still Curtain Podcast.